My name is Dean Norton. I'm honored to be the current caretaker of George and Martha Washington's Gardens and Landscapes. And I'm thrilled to be presenting to the 5 people that are watching this right now. What? There are more than 5? Oh, that's great. Anyway, look, before we start this little tour of the lower garden, just want to share a few things. First of all, it's very windy, so I'm having to speak a little louder, and I hope that the audio is working for you. Also, don't forget to type in your questions in the chat box so that we can get to those later on in the broadcast. And what are some of the other things I was supposed to say? I can't remember. If I go blank like I just did, it's just where I am right now. So it's okay. I'll get back on course. And there's one other thing. I forgot what it was, but we're going to get to it. So before we go into the lower garden, I just wanted to share with you where I am. And in the real estate terminology, you hear location, location, location. And that's why we're here, because the stable behind me and the garden walls right here, that is a classic arrangement going back centuries, where the stable is right next to the kitchen garden, because that's your source of fertilizer. Manure out, manure in. But you know what? They recognized that didn't work real well, because fresh manure can kill or burn plants. So Washington created a dung repository, and that was directly across the road. So he could take that material that came out of the stalls, take it over there, allow it to go through a decomposition or a heat for a fortnight or two, which is 2 weeks. So it's only a 2-week time period. It doesn't seem like a lot, does it? But they thought that it was enough to make it so that that material would be okay to use as a fertilizer on the plant. One thing that you need to realize is that successful gardening is going to depend on good soil and proper soil management. It's what you don't see that's the most important thing. And one way to make that really successful and your soil real rich is compost. And Washington knew that. In 1760, one of the first entries in his diary was a compost experiment. He tried 10 different boxes of 10 different composts to see what might be the best. When he was writing to Arthur Young, a very well-known agriculturalist in England, he was looking for a land manager at the time. And he said, I'm looking for a manager that's Midas-like, that whatever he touches will turn to gold, the first transmutation. That's not what he said. You know, there you go, folks. How about that? So anyway, it was a really great comment and quote, which I will remember in a bit. But anyhow, so Washington referred to a lot of horticultural books, and these horticulturists in these books were writing a great deal about compost and which materials were the best for what type soils, what combinations would work well. And they said that chicken manure was really hot. If you're using that, only use 1/3 of what you would typically use. So I want to swing over here to show you this structure. This is an outhouse or necessary, and it's very plush. It's a 3-seater. You have Washington, Jefferson, and Adams all in here at one time. And anyway, so of all the compost they were using, horse, cow, sheep, whatever, human manure was as good as anything else. So when the pan in here started to get full, they would raise up this door, take the pan out, put it in a wheelbarrow, and take it down to the dung repository. Now I like to do special things, fun things when I have groups here at Mount Vernon. And we have a Teachers Institute. Teachers come from all across the country. And we had a group of elementary school teachers from Texas. And when they were here, I think it was July, it was really, really hot, even for them. And I think it was 96 degrees, 120% humidity, whatever it was. So I thought I'd do something a little special for them. When I opened it up, I had a cooler of long neck beers. And so I handed them the beers. We started to enter the lower garden. I've never seen elementary school teachers so happy. They're just clapping like that. And then I had to say, now that's good, beep, isn't it? And they really seemed to like that comment. So I'm going to welcome you to come on into the kitchen garden. This is a beautiful gate. We used to have it locked because we didn't want people to come through here. But staff knew all we had to do was pick it up and remove it like that. So anyway, come on in. And Hinson, our camera person here, we're probably going a little blurry, but we'll catch back up in a bit. And you know what that guy said, Arthur Young? I'm looking for a manager that whatever he touches will turn to manure, the first transmutation to gold. It always comes to me. It just takes a little bit of time. So we're going to walk down here. We're walking through some fruit trees. Going to get to a point and talk a little bit about the history of the garden. So hopefully, and if you come right here, hopefully you can see some of the design behind me. So what I want you to know is this is the first garden Washington created in 1760. It was a kitchen garden. We just saw a necessary, which was necessary because people need to go to the bathroom. Well, this garden's called a garden of necessity because it was necessary for health and survival. And they typically would have been the first gardens that were planted. So it started in 1760. At that point, it was a simple rectangular garden. The garden walls went much further out into the Bowling Green, and it was much shorter than what you see here. Washington changed the landscape from a formal to a naturalistic design. And when he did that, he brought the garden walls in so that the garden became narrower. And one of the keys to the naturalistic landscape is the curved line is nature's gift. So he extended the walls to the west by adding curved walls. So now the garden went from a rectangular shape to a cathedral window. So that's what you have. Now the garden that you'll see today, you'll see all these fancy beds down here with the grass paths. The garden probably didn't look like that at all in the 18th century. Washington was really into efficiency. And so he would have done whatever necessary to grow the crops and have as plentiful amount of harvest as he could. What you see here today is a garden that was redone in 1937. It was called the Colonial Revival Period of Landscapes. And it all kind of happened when John D. Rockefeller gave millions of dollars to the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, allowing them to redo their gardens and their structures. And one thing you need to know about the Colonial Revival is, although if they're representing an historic site, they do research and they do try to incorporate that. But what was also really important at that time was beauty. It needed to be pretty. See, they wanted people to come and see the garden and admire it so much that they'll make an annual pilgrimage back to that site every year, because money's really important, right? And it worked. I know the Norton family, every summer we went to Williamsburg. I hated Williamsburg, but the gingerbread cookies were great before you left. So anyway, I love Williamsburg. It's a great place. So when the ladies first purchased the property, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association of the Union, they were concentrating their efforts on the mansion and the outbuildings. Now, they cleaned up the gardens and the landscape, of course, but they didn't get to any sort of research and restoration of the garden until 70 years later. So in 1937, when all this was going on in Williamsburg, landscape architects once again had money. They had an opportunity to make money by doing designs for other historic sites. So Morley Jeffers Williams came here, and this is the design that he came up and created. Now, I said I'm pretty sure this isn't what it looked like in the 18th century. But then again, it could have, because Washington purchased a book called New Principles of Gardening, written by Batty Langley in 1728. And although Langley's teaching all the naturalistic design principles, he does include in his book 4 plates that if you want to, plates meaning design, on pages that have designs on them, he said if you want to create a formal kitchen garden, this is the design you may want to use. So that's the book he used. Indeed, it could have looked like this, but we're just not sure. We don't try to hide the fact that that this is Colonial Revival Garden. Actually, this is the jewel in the crown as far as Colonial Revival Gardens go. There are very few left, and I hope that we can maintain this for a long, long time. Don Francisco, yes, how are you, man? Hey, this is a live broadcast, so you never know what's going to happen. Don, introduce yourself, and I'm going to go get some.
Hi, my name is Don Francisco. I'm a retired Army veteran, and I want to salute all my veterans out there. I'm the resident fighter here in the historic Point. It's quite the gentleman. Love working with Dean and learn some neat, interesting horticulture facts from Dean Norton. And if you know Dean, you know that he's a true Clemson Tiger, true to the heart.
Well, we're both Tiger fans. He's LSU, and I happen to be Clemson. So do I have it? Is it at 1 o'clock? Yeah, what are you doing? Thank you. All right, so let me just share one thing with you all. People that work here love Mount Vernon. We have a lot of fun. We put in a good 8 hours worth of work, but I think you would agree. I think the 8 hours at Mount Vernon should be the best part of our day, and it sure is for me. So whenever Don's playing the fife, you can hear him all throughout the estate. I grab my bugle, and we have a little competition to see who can play reveille the fastest. So let me make sure I'm going to start, because we're in different keys. Let me see how high. That's how I start. Okay. You ready? One, two, three. That's all right. Give me.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.
All
Good to
right,
see you. Good
bye-bye.
to see you. All right. So we're back to the history of the garden. So let's talk about some features that we know are true. Ada, if you can kind of swing over and we'll catch this wall. The garden was walled. And it was important to be walled because it protected it from wild animals and it also created a microclimate. So you could, it's warmer in this garden than anywhere else outside of it. So you can start your gardening earlier in the spring, you can extend it further into the fall. I want you to notice the beautiful top on that wall, how it's angled like that. Thomas Jefferson said a good wall must have a good hat. So you do that to protect water from getting inside the cracks in the mortar and it could break the wall apart. Also notice the terracing. The garden was terraced. It's much easier to plant and cultivate on a level surface than it is a slope. So this was quite an effort to do this. That wall that you see over there, that's about a 12-foot drop. So a lot of effort went into that. As far as the walks, we know that Washington directed the brick kiln to make 9x9 pavers, which is what we have here. And it was a very smart idea. When you're running a wheelbarrow on a path, if it's grass and it's a rainy weekend, you're going to ruin that path. It's going to be destroyed. But laying bricks in a single file line like this, you could run on that for years and not hurt anything, which is great. Put my bugle down here. Hopefully no one will take it. Some of the staff may hope that someone does take it. So anyway, around the garden beds are espaliered fruit trees. Once again, the 18th century horticulturist said that surround the quarters of your garden with espaliered fruit trees. And that's what the landscape designers did because it makes sense for them to do so. And they would have been not this low, but the plants on the interior are apples and pears, whereas the espaliers against the wall, and Washington, the gardeners, we have 2 years of their weekly reports, said that they were tying trees, nailing trees to the wall. Well, they're not nailing the trees, they're putting nails in the mortar, then tying the trees to the wall to help train them. So this is a sort of effect that you would have surrounding the garden beds. This is a 4-arm espalier. So each one of these arms that go off each one of these branches that go out opposite are called arms. So we know that it would have been 4 or 5 arm espaliers surrounding these vegetable beds. Now, if you can get close enough, I want you to see how you see how the one branch is a little lower than the other branch. They're not exactly opposite. Well, the reason for that is when you're training a fruit tree, you get it to this point, and do you see how the buds, one is lower than the other? So you cut to a point. This is going to continue to grow, but these are going to be the 2 branches that will become an arm. So you just tie them, let them go ahead and start growing, tie them to a trellis or something, and let them develop. And then you just keep doing that as you go up. Pretty simple practice. Washington said his gardeners were quite clever, and they were very good at grafting or inoculating, which is exactly the same term for grafting. Okay, we're going to turn around. Oh, one other thing before we go. Notice the pale fence on top of the brick wall. That's pretty interesting because the Bowling Green is surrounded by serpentine avenues, trees on either side to provide good shade, which was made your walk or stroll much more enjoyable. But the reason for the fence is 2 reasons. One, it's aesthetically pleasing when you're on the other side, but this side it's favorable to the garden and the gardener because it allows the garden to breathe. You don't want to exclude all air. You want some air movement. It helps keep diseases and other things from growing. So it was really, really important. Okay, so we're going to walk on down here just a bit, make it a little blurry. The brick walk is obviously much grander than it was in Washington's day. I don't know how many we have, 6 or something. Well, we do that because we have almost 1 million visitors a year. At least we did before what's going on now. But anyway, so we did that to accommodate our visitors. Once again, notice the fruit trees that were passing by. The great thing about espalier trees, when you're growing them in a single plane like this, is you can grow 70 trees and lose absolutely no space to the production of vegetables, which is really ideal. They're pleasing to the eye, and they're very easy to maintain and manage. And they do produce fruit, which is really great. Okay, how we doing here, Ada? Okay, you want to come down here so we can get the cold frame. We'll be talking about the vegetables in a bit. So I wanted to show you another feature that you may have seen in an 18th century garden. You had to have a good source of water. If the horticulturists, again, writing books, said if you don't have a good source of water, you might as well not even try to garden. So they would have had something like this. This is an above ground cistern. It goes no deeper than what you see. It would have been filled by bringing water over from the well, which was near the family kitchen, or by rainwater. Now, it was an ideal situation because the horticulturists then realized that water that had been warmed or softened by the sun is much better for putting on plants than cold water brought up from a deep well. Warm water is much more accepted. Cold water will constrict roots and throw the plant in the shot. So that would have acted as your dipping well. If you see the grape trellises, Washington had grapevines. He tried to grow grapes for a vineyard, but that failed. But he certainly had some grapes just for the table. And that's what you remember. These are muscat grape or muscadine grapes. This is a good point to tell you that this area is Martha Washington's domain. She was a very keen plantswoman. And she stayed in constant communication with the gardener during Washington's lengthy absences during the 8 years of war and 8 years serving as president. A lot of times in Washington's letter back to the land manager, the last paragraph or two, there was a line or two from Martha to the gardener to make sure seeds had been sown, that artichoke, that you had acquired the best artichoke seeds. So there was that direct communication. They would meet in the morning, decide what vegetables to be picked for the evening meal. And that was one of her main responsibilities, was the evening meal. Not only was it meant to be elegant and abundant, and if not, it was a direct reflection on her, but the more vegetables you could put on the table, the more special that meal would be. Martha actually wrote in a letter that vegetables are the best part of being in the country. And we would certainly agree with that as well. Okay, we're going to walk on down a little further, our cold frames. Cold frames are a nice feature to have. They're called cold frames because there's no heat of any sort, but you can start your head vegetables earlier in the season, let them grow for a few weeks, and then when you plant them out, they have a good start on the season, and you'll get your produce much sooner. So one of the fun things about working at Mount Vernon in this garden is getting fresh produce. I mean, there's nothing like it. So one of the really fun things to do when I give tours is to eat your way through the garden. I mean, that's just great. One time I had a family with children, and people tell me when you're giving the tour, there are children on this tour. And so that means I have to liven it up, make it fun for the kids, which isn't a problem for me. But anyway, so we're walking through the garden, and there were some bell peppers. And I said, have you ever eaten a bell pepper right off the plant? He said, well, no. And I said, try it. And I really didn't think they would, but they bit into it, and they were hooked. They were hooked, which is really cool. So this is some kale that I got, and I'm not kidding. Just eating like this is so really, really good. I also have some leaf lettuce that they would have grown. Understand that the vegetables we grow are not the exact type that George and Martha Washington would have grown, because when they found a better vegetable that wasn't bitter or stringy, that whole vegetable was tossed. So most of the vegetables we find are from mid-1800s, and that's what we include in the garden. So one thing I forgot, it's always good to have some ranch dressing close by. It makes everything a little better. So let me put a little bit on here. Oh, yeah. I mean, you can't beat it. So another really good thing is spinach. How can you beat spinach, huh? Fresh spinach. It's a little limp right now because I picked it a little while ago in preparation to talk to you. But, I'm telling you, what a good salad that I have right there. How are we doing on time, Andy? How are we looking? Okay. So the vegetables in the garden are all appropriate to Washington's time. We have 2 weeks of weekly reports with the gardener. No, we have 2 years of weekly reports. And they're very specific about what they're planting. So we're so fortunate to have all the materials, primary source materials that we can use to represent these gardens as accurately as possible. And that makes it really fun. So let me see, Ed, hey, come here. I want to introduce you to Ed, our kitchen gardener. Now, we have an organization here, a group called Members of Mount Vernon. And any of you all that are local, I want you to look to try to join that. And the reason I want to introduce you to Ed is I encourage members to come in and get to know us, because we love to show you around, answer any questions you may have, walk through the garden with us and try some good vegetables. Bring your own ranch, though. We don't always have it available.
Good afternoon.
Hey, how you
Beautiful
doing?
day.
Yeah, why don't you take off your mask? I'll
Okay.
distance a little bit from
Sure, sure.
So, Ed, how long have you been here?
I've been here 13 years.
13 amazing years. Ed is an amazing gardener, very professional. In the 18th century, the horticulturist said that a garden this size, which is just about an acre, will take one full-time gardener and should feed 14 to 18 people. Can you feed 14 to 18 people?
Yeah, I'd like to believe so.
You think so? And what kind of crops are you growing right now?
Kale, spinach, and lettuces.
Yeah, I just tried some of them. They're really great. What about your head vegetables? Are they already gone? Or?
No, we just got some in now, our cabbages mainly, and then, that's our main thing right now is our cabbages.
And they're kind of the fall crops, right?
Sure.
How many separate plantings do you do a year?
We do 3 plantings a year.
Okay.
Yes.
Where does the produce go that we collect from here?
We get some to the food banks, and on special occasions we do farm-to-table events.
Yeah, they're great. We haven't done one this year for obvious reasons, but Ed, we give as much as 6,000 pounds of produce a year to the food banks, and also to a group down the road called Arcadia. We're really, really very proud to do that. The garden beds look so good. How do you keep them looking as good?
I use this swing hoe here,
Oh yeah, sure.
which is shaped like a swing, and basically it just swings through the way you.
So you just kind of slice them, right?
Sure.
Well, they look great, and that's true. The horticulturists talk about a dust mulch, which is basically constant cultivation, which is what we do. So we're not using herbicide or anything in here. Ed is just on a daily basis. You can hear this makes a little bit of a noise. You can hear that.
Right.
It's a little muffled when you do it in the soil, but that sort of thing just is wonderful to hear when you're coming in. You know Ed somewhere. So what is that building down at the end?
That's the seed house, which now we use for our tools.
So you actually use that today?
Yes, we do.
And it's an 18th century structure. Now that's pretty amazing that they let us use an 18th century structure for tools and seeds and other things like that.
Right.
Did you know I proposed to my wife in there?
No.
Yeah,
Tell me
she
about
said.
it.
Yeah, no, she said no, but I eventually convinced her, and it's been 35 years, so that's really not too bad. That's
Awesome.
really not too
Good
bad.
for you.
So, 13 years. What is yours at best season? What's your most fun season?
I would say the spring. I really like seeing things emerging from the ground and doing well for themselves. Strawberries.
Oh,
Coming
yeah,
in.
strawberries, raspberries.
Sure.
Oh, they're great. And what about how do you put the garden to bed?
We do a lot of composting. So we compost a lot of the beds, and then we'll use a lot of straw on things to cover them up, protect them over the winter.
Right.
The winter cold.
So when winter comes, you guys aren't up in the seed room just eating donuts and drinking coffee.
No, we're hard at work.
Hard at work. Exactly. Ladies, did you hear that? We were working hard. So have we gotten any questions at all that people may want to ask?
We definitely do. Okay, so Cynthia Miller says, I noticed the wind, and this reminded me that soon winter will be coming. I wondered, how did George Washington and how do you now protect the garden area in the winter?
Well, we do lots of composting, and then for the artichokes, they'll be overwintered with straw, so they will die back like a perennial. We cut them back, and then we'll put straw over them.
And the figs.
And the figs, yes.
Yeah, the key, folks, to protecting plants.
Of course.
Strawberries, yeah,
Yes,
for
yes.
straw. The key to protecting plants is not necessarily wrapping them with burlap or spraying anything on the leaves. It's to keep the ground from freezing.
Exactly.
If you can keep the ground from freezing, you've accomplished your task. So that's why we compost. We do a winter mulch.
Sure.
The artichokes, which is called perennializing them. Artichokes, the strawberries, or the figs. So yeah, great question.
We have another question here from one of our YouTube viewers. Do you all try to use strictly historically accurate methods to garden, or if something is more efficient and safe, but with plants from modern times, would you use it?
Well, let me just share. Ed is in our typical uniform, so we are not in costume. So we can talk about football over the weekend. We can talk about anything. So 18th century, this is one thing that Ed will totally agree with. Ed's doing all the gardening team here, which are all exceptional, are following the same practices that the enslaved gardeners did years ago. They're basically our garden brethren. We're cultivating, we're tying, we're pruning, we're grafting. So when you're out here sweating in July, your garden brothers were out here doing the same thing 250 years ago. So yes, we do. The one thing that we really benefit from is an underground irrigation system, but it's hidden, so you don't really see it. But when Ed waters it, he has that water flowing.
Yep. A lot of watering in the summertime, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Were dressings used on vegetables back then?
Yeah, ranch was preferred, I think. Poppy seed hadn't been invented yet.
Thousand Islands.
Yeah, Thousand Island.
Yeah,
It's a good one.
of
Yeah, I don't think so. Vegetables would have been boiled a lot. I'm not really into the preparation of the produce because that's a little out of my realm. But let me tell you a book that you really want to get. I think it's one of the best books that we've published. It's called Dining with the Washingtons. It is exceptional. There are recipes. There's history of the gardeners a bit, the chefs. It's really wonderful. So check that out. Dining with the Washingtons.
Absolutely.
Alyssa asks, since you brought up the necessary, did they compost the human waste?
Yeah. Human manure was as good as any other. So it was taken right down to the dung repository and mixed right in. And truly, every year, and how thick do you put a compost layer?
2 to 3 inches.
2 to 3 inches every year, and then that's worked into the ground.
Absolutely. Yes.
Every single season, we're adding that much. And during the growing season, do you add any more?
If we need to supplement, we will here and there.
And for the most part, folks, we make our own compost. See, my responsibility as horticulturist is anything to do with chlorophyll or manure. So we're big on the compost or the manure that comes from our livestock team. And we have it all out in a big field, and we windrow it, we mix it. So we use our own compost in the garden, which is great.
Cynthia has another question here. What is the overall shape of the lower garden? Is it sort of like a swan, snake, or S shape from left to right?
No, where we're looking right now, it's linear, and it's in a shape of a cathedral window or a bullet. And it's 0.99 of an acre, just under an acre in size.
And this is south facing this way.
That's right.
It's all south facing garden.
And the cold frames, which are down over the hill there, they have a southern exposure as well. So this is a perfect location. It's on the south side of the Bowling Green. Good sun. As I said, the terracing probably would have been all earth, and the plants would have been planted in rows running north-south. And another thing, too, if you're familiar with Monticello, you may be familiar with their 1,000-foot-long kitchen garden. Well, if you were to take this terrace and put it end to end with the other terrace, you're starting to look exactly like that. It's pretty neat.
Okay, we have another question here from Barrett, and this is one that we get often. So I heard that they grew their own cannabis or hemp. What did they use it for?
Yeah, hemp was grown all over Washington's 5 farms. He said plant it wherever you can. And he planted a lot of different types of hemp as well. He's always looking for a better quality. The main reason for the hemp was for his fishing industry, the fishing fleet. He had 5 fisheries. There was a 2-week period in the spring when the shad and herring were running that they stretched seines out in the Potomac that were 450 feet long, and they would bring those in, and any one of those times they're bringing the net in, they're catching 1,000 fish. But also they're dragging the net on the bottom and catching a lot of oyster shells, which are just like razor blades, and they rip those nets. So in the off season, they need to process that hemp for the fiber that they could then make into rope or twine. And that's what repaired those nets.
Sarah asks, how is insect damage prevented?
Herbs. We use the herbs to help us. Some companion planting there. I mean, that's not the general idea of the herbs. It's for medicinal and culinary uses. But they do help with some of the insects. So.
They do help. And there was a wonderful article written by Wesley Green, who used to be the manager of the historic nursery in Williamsburg, and he wrote an article about insects in the 18th century, and it was really wonderful. And he goes on and on about what could happen here, what could happen there. But he ends the article by saying basically they didn't have them. They had very few insects and pests that we have today. So they weren't really dealing with all that. It was more, you have failure of plants due to insects, disease, but also extreme conditions. Heavy rains, which we've certainly dealt with before, heat, extreme heat. That's what in the 18th century they would have dealt with more than anything else. And possibly incompetent gardeners. But that wasn't the case because Washington hired professional gardeners under the Articles of Indenture. And the best gardener to be had in the 18th century was Scottish. They were really well trained in horticulture, but also in etiquette, and playing musical instruments, games. They were just a well-rounded person.
Cynthia asks, is the gate you walked through earlier original?
No. There's not a lot that's wood like a gate that's original, except for the outbuildings. A lot of that wood is 18th century, which is really fabulous. And just now they're doing some restoration work on it's called the servants' quarters, I believe. And they've scraped down to bare wood. And in between, the boards are beveled, so it looks like stone. And in between where those bevels are, you can see red. And the red is the prime that they used in the 18th century. So you're looking at what was applied 200 some odd years ago, which is really, truly amazing. Got another one coming, or should we?
We do. Penelope, your daughter, says hello.
Oh, hey, Penelope. How are you? Penelope worked here for 10 years. Really a great gardener. All my daughters worked here for a number of years. One of them didn't like it, though. She barely lasted a summer, I think. But I can't tell you how wonderful it was for me to be on the gardens, walking around, and I hear, hey, Dad. I mean, that's really very, very special. And Ed was so special to my daughters. Sephora, I don't want to embarrass you, but you sang to her, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. What were you singing? Was it a special song? Or?
Oh, I can't remember.
You can't remember. But anyway, she loved that. So
she also has a question for us as well.
Oh.
And she asks, did all the food that fed the Washington household come from the kitchen garden?
Well, yes. Everything here certainly went over to the family kitchen. But there were vegetables growing in every garden enclosure we had. In the upper garden, which was actually the pleasure garden, where people were meant to walk in to see beautiful flowers and admire the aroma and the beauty of the flowers. But in among, he planted his vegetables first and then surrounded that with a border of flowers. So there's more space in there for vegetables than actually flowers. There are vegetables down in the fruit garden and nursery. So everywhere there were vegetables. And one thing that you should know is that the enslaved workers, and there were several that worked in the garden, and then the other help in the kitchen and the mansion when they were idle, they would come help in the gardens as well. They had their own gardens. They didn't get the produce from here, but Washington and the slaves exchanged vegetables. They bartered and traded, and also were paid sometimes when they had extra. And then they could sell the vegetables that they had in their gardens at the slave market in Alexandria on Sundays.
We have quite a few questions coming in.
Cool.
We have somebody here watching from Paris. So.
Yeah, all right. I love that. I hope it's Iris.
It is Iris.
That's wonderful.
Okay, so Kimmy asks, what is the easiest herb to grow and most abundant?
Rosemary, of course. It's got to be the most abundant, the easiest one to grow for me.
What are some other herbs they might have grown?
Lavender, thyme, oregano. Mm-hmm. Those are our main herbs.
So rosemary is called the herb of remembrance, and the fragrance here. The fragrance is just really amazing. When our ladies come here at Mount Vernon to meet with the board and to go over what we've done in a year, I often try to put a rosemary sprig in their garden, not in their garden, in their room. It adds a great fragrance, and as I said, it's the herb of remembrance. So I want them to know we're always remembering them, and we always look forward to when they're here.
We have a question here from Miriam. Did they have beehives?
They did. Actually, Washington directs the carpenter to get wood to make a beescape in this garden. We used to have beehives in this garden, but we removed them because bees and our visitors just weren't getting along. So we thought it would be best to move them. We now have beehives on the property, but they're out a few hundred yards from where we are now. But it does seem as if Washington purchased more honey than he did produce it here on the property.
Deborah asks, did Jefferson give the Washingtons suggestions for their garden?
No, we didn't need suggestions from Jefferson. No, no, not really. They exchanged ideas on farming, but not really gardening. And what you need to know about George Washington was he was a farmer, passionate about farming, but not necessarily a gardener. And so when he re-landscaped Mount Vernon in 1785, starting on January of that year, he was a designer for a year and a half. And after that, he said, it's yours. You take care of it, but I want a weekly report. I want to know what's going on. Make sure you communicate with Martha to make sure everything is that she needs. So they didn't communicate on gardening.
Iris asks, did George Washington receive some French vegetables or plants from his French allies during the American Revolution?
That is a great question, and I do not know. I have not come across that. I know there were great exchanges. Castellou, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, was an incredibly good friend, and they really admired each other. But I would say that I am not aware of that. Although I will share that Washington, if you were coming to visit him, don't bring him a bottle of wine, although I'm sure he'd enjoy it. Bring him a plant. He loved receiving plants from friends, especially if there were plants from outside of the geographic area where we are.
Wasn't it entertainment almost for them to exchange plants?
Oh, yeah. It's pass along plants. It's fun to even do today. Share your plants with other people. Because when they go out in the garden, they'll remember you because of the plant that they planted. It came from you, your house, your garden.
We have got a couple more questions here. So Kate asks, what were the most common vegetables grown at Mount Vernon?
Well, let me talk 18th century. Well, really the Gardener's Weekly Reports, it's like you're just in Safeway shopping. Carrots, beets, radishes, beans,
peppers.
Yeah, lots of different peppers, lettuce, all your head vegetables. So it's a list as if you're just right in any sort of Piggly Wiggly or Safeway or whatever it may be. So the most common, I would think, cabbage was probably grown more than anything else. What's that?
We grow that
twice a year. And how many heads do we collect every year? I mean, how many pounds? It's
a lot.
A lot of pounds.
Tons.
Yeah. Well, it's almost tons. And most of that, as I said, goes to the local food bank because it holds so well.
So we've got two more questions. Our next question is from Christine, and she asks, what variety of fig tree is grown at Mount Vernon?
I believe it's the brown turkey.
Yep, brown turkey fig, which is a very old variety. We always hope that it survives the wintertime, right?
Yes.
You never know. But again, the mulching is really, really critical as far as keeping that alive. And if you can keep it alive, you really get an abundance of figs that year. But if it dies back to the ground, it's a trouble. It's a problem that you don't lose the plants.
No, you don't lose them. It's just hard to get another crop.
Right. Exactly. It just takes too long.
Well, weather plays a big role. I mean, with everything,
Right. And so the figs are planted down at the end of the garden next to the wall, so they're protected. Mm-hmm. And that's one way that you can plants that may have a little tougher time because of exposure. Plant them somewhere where they're out of the wind or where they have a southern exposure, and that helps a lot.
Okay, so we've got our last question here from Cynthia Miller, and she asks, did George Washington or did Martha take guests often through the gardens? Did they have any signage about plants, or would they just point things out as they went through the garden?
It does not seem that Martha ever took anyone on a tour. I think she was really just at the house greeting people, making sure all their needs were taken care of. George Washington did not take people on tours. The gardeners, they did. We know that. And if they gave a good tour, sometimes they would get a tip, so they wanted to do that. More than likely, it's a great question, actually, is that this garden here probably wasn't on the tour at all. there was no reason for people to come in here because everybody had a kitchen garden, no reason to see it. And you'd have to see it because when you sat down to the evening meal, you knew if there was a good garden or not by what was presented to you on the table.
That's all our questions for now.
Okay, are we on a good time to wrap it up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so look, Ed, thank you for joining me. Just an amazingly great guy. All of our gardeners, men and women, are super. We're very passionate about what we do. I welcome all of you all to come visit us again at some point. And don't forget if you're local, join our members. We'd love to have you, and we'd love to see you in the garden.
Absolutely.
Take care.